Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Love seeing all of you. Thanks so much for being here. Today, we are continuing on in our vision statement. Last week, Pastor Mike covered the second and fourth points, and I'm going to be sharing more on them today. And these points of our vision statement are: we are every person growing to spiritual maturity through studying God's Word, prayer, making devotions, small groups, and taking on a ministry to care for the needs of and give to others. And we are equipping every person for a significant ministry by helping them discover the gifts and talents that God gave them. So I was reflecting on these 2 points, and I was thinking they're really not just arbitrary ideals or things that we should do as religious people, but actually these are the very, very basics of faith that we've learned directly from Jesus. These are the very basics of faith that we've learned from our founders, true parents. I was thinking about Jesus' life, and in Luke 2:52, it says, "And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature, and in favor with God and man." There's very little in the Bible that describes Jesus' life until he began his ministry. Almost the entire New Testament is all about 3 years of his life in ministry and his death and his resurrection. But what we do know of those 30 years leading up to that point, of the few paragraphs, this is one of them, that he increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. But he was growing to maturity through studying God's words. He was very, very intimate and familiar with the Jewish scriptures and laws. He prayed and he made devotions. He spent hours and hours in prayer. We know that he could spend all night in prayer, and that he fasted. He fasted for 40 days. So these are the conditions that he made. But imagine that Jesus did all of those things, all of those incredible things, but then did nothing for others. Maybe he would have been respected as a monk or a holy man of his time to the local people, because when you do those kind of things, you do stand out. But he wouldn't have been Jesus as we know him. The Jesus that we know is because of what he did with this wisdom and this knowledge and this spiritual maturity. What he did with the heart for people that he gained through his prayers and the heart for God. And what he did with the inner strength that he developed through his conditions and his devotions and his fasting. The world and history knows Jesus because of what he did with that foundation, because of the love that he shared with people, because of the life and time that he invested into teaching, even when he was exhausted, because of the feet that he washed. And most of all, because of his powerful love and forgiveness and willingness to sacrifice himself for people who didn't even deserve or want it. That's what we know Jesus for. And here's another quote. This is from Mark 10:45. "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." And then I think about Reverend and Mrs. Moon, the founders of our faith. And there are so many parallels in their life. We know a little bit more about them because they weren't born 2,000 years ago. But we know that Reverend Moon spent much of his youth studying. Right? His family converted to Christianity when he was young, maybe 10 or so. And he memorized Bible verses and hymns. He learned about God through nature. He was desperate to learn everything he could about God through examining everything he could in this world, through examining people and relationships and nature. He also would pray all through the night. One of our most familiar stories is that on Easter, he prayed all through the night on top of a mountain, trying to understand the difficulties of the world and what he could do about it, and he met Jesus. And he developed his physical and spiritual strength by challenging himself to overcome the temptations of his physical body. Definitely, in his hometown, he was a unique character. People recognized him as being very different from the rest. But would we know him? Would the world know him if that was all that he did? And then his wife, what we refer to as a true mother, her child was very different, but also she spent almost all of her youth in support of her mother and grandmother in their religious efforts, preparing for the returning Lord. She spent much of her time praying and studying. So also, many people recognized her and said, "Who is this unique person?" But it is what they were called to do, what they did with that foundation in their life, and how they ministered to others that makes them known the world over. So these are such foundational aspects of our life of faith. It's the prayer, reading, devotions. These are the tools or the practices that we need to find clarity and to develop strength to be able to take on a ministry, to give to and take care of the needs of others. They're very closely intertwined, right? If you just have the first half, if you just have the spiritual practice and the faith in God, that's very, very good. But with that alone, there's only so far that can go. There's a limit to what God can do with that. But at the same time, I also know people who've gotten inspired to start something and do something new, and wow, I really want to do this for the world or for this community. But without foundation, without spiritual practices, without strength, the ministry sputters out very quickly or fails to launch. As a pastor, I've seen it many times. Maybe if you haven't seen it, if it doesn't happen, you don't know about it, but it happens. So we can't have one and not the other and be a complete person. So in our faith, we have some terms that we use to describe this. We call this the foundation of faith and the foundation of substance. It means that in our course of restoration, as we are becoming restored back to being God's true sons and daughters, we first need to make a foundation of faith. We need to connect to God through reading and prayer. We ingrain God's words in our heart, and that actually changes the way that we see ourselves and the way that we see others. We see our family, we see this world. And then through devotions or conditions, we show God our resolve, and it strengthens our spirit. So that's the foundation of faith. But then, based on that strengthened relationship with God, we can make a foundation of substance. What is substance? It means we take our faith and we make it real. We make it tangible. Substance is something you can touch. It's something real. Make it real in our relationships. We make it real in our families. Our faith becomes demonstrated. So with both, that's the point where we can become a channel for God, where we can be at least somewhat. I feel like we're not always perfectly there. Sometimes we've got some little obstructions here and there. But nevertheless, it's in that practice and in that trying we become a channel for God, and God can love and serve and touch others through us. I really believe that the true beauty of faith is seen when it becomes substantial, when we can become God's hands and feet. So I was thinking about my experience along this journey, and I was remembering back to when I was in high school, and I first started to learn more about God and the Bible and history and divine principle. And the first couple times that I attended a workshop or an activity and I got exposed to it and I had some amazing prayers, I got really excited. And then I went home and I was like, I know something should be different, but I don't feel actually that different. Or I feel called that I should make a difference in somebody else's life, but I had absolutely no confidence to do that. And it was only after several years of immersing myself in God's words, or immersing myself in life of faith practices like reading and prayer, that I could begin. I remember the first time I actually felt like I had a little bit of success. I came back from a summer of service. I'd spent a whole month doing 100 hours of volunteer work in painting schools and in meeting inner city kids, and also a lot of life of faith practice, prayer and reading. And I was really inspired that through service, just like through that quote, that the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, that through service that I could become closer to God, and God can touch people. Even if we had a different belief system, or even if I couldn't change everything for somebody, but if I could serve them, and God could be with them. So I really got that. And I went back to my senior year of high school, and I told my counselor, I want to create a service club called Service for Peace. And my counselor was like, I don't have time for this. I've got people who are being suspended, and I've got to deal with this and this. And I was like, aren't you supposed to support people? Anyway, but I was determined to do it anyway. And even though I didn't have a lot of foundation, I wasn't very experienced. I didn't really know how to work with people or give God's love to people. And I had grand plans. I didn't establish grand things, but I did establish a service through the Beta Club, which was kind of like an honors club in our school, rather than just being kind of an elite club of people who made good grades. We volunteered at a food pantry, and we established a highway cleanup right in front of the school, like 2 miles of highway. And it blows my mind because the Beta Club still volunteers at the food pantry 18 years later. And the Beta Club still has a cleanup sign, and they do it 2 or 3 times a year, cleaning up on the highway there. And it's something small, you know. It's just something small, but it was so affirming to me that when I could change my own perspective, if I could change something about my life that's more aligned with God, then I can impact something outside of myself that can touch other people. That was the beginning. And I think that, you know, kind of the way we present it in our faith is first you need a foundation of faith, and once you are one with God, then you can have a foundation of substance. And I think that for most of us, the reality is we have to do a little bit of both at the same time. And that's been my experience, where, yeah, I did something, and then I had to go deeper, and I had to grow more. And I had to heal more parts of myself and find God's deeper love for me and deeper love for my family and deeper love for others. And then I could do more for others too. So yes, the true beauty of our faith is seen when it becomes substantial, when we can become God's hands and feet. But it doesn't happen automatically. Why do people get stuck when maybe they're just inspired to do something, but they don't have the foundation of faith? Let's be real. Working with people can be messy. It can be complicated. Because we are all so different. We're all a unique individual reflection of God, and we're not exactly the same. But also, in order to work well with others, we have to confront parts of ourselves that might be prideful, or that might be selfish, or jealous. Or we have to recognize that I may have experienced a lack of love at different points in my life. And that instead of being able to fully give to people like I think I want to, I'm actually deep inside looking to receive. That's kind of the nitty-gritty reality of why sometimes it seems like it's easier to pray, or it's easier to read God's words and get inspired than it is to express that in the world. So in order to get to that point, we really do need a foundation of faith in our life. We need to become confident in God's love for us and for others, to develop the strength to be able to act with godly character, and to let go of my pride or my jealousy or my resentment. That's really when we become free to carry it outward. So the foundation of substance is really more of an outward expression of what's already on the inside, our foundation of faith. I have another quote from Reverend Moon. In order to make a wild olive tree into a true olive tree, we must cut off the wild tree and graft it onto the scion of the true tree. Similarly, in order for people who are like wild olive trees, that's like us, to become true olive trees, right, being restored to God's true sons and daughters, we must go through the process where they first deny themselves and then totally affirm something new. By doing so, a person changes his intrinsic nature from that of a wild olive tree, which includes selfishness, jealousy, resentment, feeling like I have so much lack of love in my life, to that of a true olive tree, so that he can emerge as a person led only by goodness. I feel like it's very easy to be led. Sometimes we want to do something good, but it's led by a selfish desire. It might look good on the outside, but it's led by a selfish desire, and eventually that will bear fruit, not always in goodness. But we want to emerge as a person led only by goodness. Then such people form, and this is a foundation of substance, right? A family, a tribe, an ethnic people, a nation, and a world. So this is our vision for each person. And it's not really optional. Sorry. We're God's children. That's our original nature. There are many other things that we've acquired along the way. But who we are at our deepest core is God's children. And the journey of a child of God is to become one in heart with God, to understand God's love, and to share that love outside of just ourselves. So that is, I understood deeper through the last couple of days. That is why that is such a big part of our vision statement. And what we want to encourage for Pastor Mike and myself, and for every person in our community. So please join me in prayer. Most beloved Heavenly Parent, thank you for this beautiful day. Thank you so much for being in our lives. Heavenly Parent, you know us better than anybody else. You know us better than the person sitting next to us. You know us better than our own parents and our own children, our own spouses. You know why we are the way we are, and sometimes we get frustrated because we find parts of ourselves that don't resemble you. And we don't want to hold on to those. And God, you know, even as you work to bring us closer, and even as you work sometimes through difficulties to separate us from those parts of ourselves, you have so much compassion for us because you know exactly where they come from. So God, I pray we can never give up on you. I pray we can always know that you are loving us unconditionally and with such compassion and with such encouragement. You're rooting for us to sometimes let go of the difficulties or the pain and the resentments that we hold on to. But you encourage us through those difficulties because you know that there's something much better waiting for us when we do, Heavenly Parent. And sometimes it feels like we're losing when we give up something, but I pray that we can understand that it's sometimes in the process of losing that we really gain the most. And we can empty ourselves and we can be filled with you. And when we're filled with you, then we can share that with others. Heavenly Parent, each one of us is so unique and so special. And there's something that each one of us has that you want to share with the world. So I pray that we can grow ourselves, become a clearer channel for you, and that we can, through maturity, be able to share your blessings with the people around us. And I offer this prayer in my name, Michael and Adonia Hendrick, a Blessed Angel family. Amen and adieu. Okay, thank you, everybody.